Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics. So this video we're going to start a series on RDS handguns for beginners. I've done quite a few videos on RDS handguns at this point. However, for a newer shooter, some of those videos may be too far ahead of where your skill level might be, because we all got to start somewhere, right? So I wanted to do a series of shorter videos that kind of breaks down the nuances that we have to address when transitioning from iron sights on a handgun to a red dot on a handgun. In the first video in the series, we're going to talk about the master grip and the draw stroke and what changes need to take place in developing your skill set. Now, the red dot on the handgun is a more natural way to shoot. It allows us to stay target focused. It allows us to focus on exactly what we want to hit. We don't have to refocus our eyes between a rear sight, a front sight, a target, and kind of have a relationship going on throughout the shooting process. So the actual use of the sight is very intuitive, but one of the problems that people have is picking up the dot on the draw stroke. It does require slightly more discipline. Although, if you look at it conversely, iron sights allow you to be lazier. So I don't actually like the term or like the concept of the red dot requires you to be more disciplined in your draw stroke, although it will get you a more refined, more efficient draw stroke. I kind of like to think of it the other way. The iron sights let you be lazier because they're on the same horizontal plane. So when we're drawing that gun, the gun comes into our field of vision, and since we're going to near focus first to get our sight alignment, it's much easier to pick up that alignment, relatively speaking, than it is for a red dot. With the red dot, we have the optic and the objective sides of the lens. The objective side of the lens is likely to be aligned roughly where you want to shoot, and you can try that yourself just by looking at a spot on the target and drawing the gun. And when you don't see your dot, change nothing in your grip and then move your head around to see where the dot's at. And this will work at all distances. Of course, the further back you get, the more your natural eye-hand coordination is going to show you how efficient it is. The problem that new shooters have with the red dot, and some people have to work their way through it, is that optic to eye alignment. How do I make sure in my grip and my draw stroke, those things helping me, that I'm actually getting the dot in front of my field of view? I'm able to look through the optic and see the red dot. And that all starts with the master grip doesn't really change much, but the actual draw stroke itself, there are some slight variations, or some, I should say, slight changes that we do have to make in our practice to make sure we consistently get that dot. Luckily, the first step in that, regardless of your carry position, be it appendix, be it duty, be it small of the back, ankle, whatever, is eye-hand coordination. Getting used to the fact that my eyes can guide my hands, kinesthetics. We also have to rely on something called proprioception, which is our body's natural ability to know where our limbs are even if we're not looking at them, which means I can reach back here and grab my wallet without having to physically guide the process, because my hand knows where my butt's at, and it knows where my wallet is in my pockets because of my spatial awareness, my own personal being, all that stuff. So there's a lot of anatomical science that goes into it, but at the basic level, all we're really relying on is hand-eye coordination. So what I'm going to do when I'm practicing this, and this doesn't require you to fire any rounds, in fact it's more helpful to do this in dry fire, is I'm going to choose a target. I may even set up an IDPA or a silhouette or what have you, and I want a contrasting target, which means I want a body shape and I want a contrasting color for my actual point of aim, and I'm going to start big and work my way smaller, 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 smaller. I use like a 1-inch circle at this point, and that's going to be where I want my dot to settle on my draw stroke. And I'm going to focus on that. Something you might find to be helpful if you're having trouble with those focus issues is take a target and write words on it, actual words that you have to read. So if you can read the words, especially as distance increases, you know that you are target focused and not going to be dot focused, as is some habit people have coming from a front iron sight focus to the red dot. I got that from Will over at Centrifuge Training. He actually writes song lyrics and puts targets throughout the lyrics as they go down the target, which is a very smart idea. Wish I'd thought of it. I just wrote the word cat on a target because, you know, monosyllable sometimes is the way to go, contrary to how people might feel about my vocabulary. So I'm going to choose that point of aim, and then I'm going to draw the gun and I'm going to present it. And the trick that I'm looking for, and one of the habits I should say, we'll start with that. The habit that I'm trying to get out of is the habit that a lot of shooters have to come in muzzle high. We kind of ride that gun into presentation in a wheelie, and you can have a friend help you out with this. Grab your iron sight gun or your red dot gun or whatever and perform a full power draw stroke while he's filming you. In slow-mo, as most smartphones have slow motion. And what you'll probably find, the majority of shooters, and this is a very large sample size of a lot of red dot students I've taught over the years, is the muzzle tends to come in slightly elevated. Not a big deal on iron sights, again, because we have that ability to be a little bit lazier in our refinement because we're going to near focus first to get the sight alignment, then the sight picture. On the red dot, if you're coming in muzzle high, you may not get your dot, or the dot may be high in the window, which is something we don't want to have. So in my draw stroke, I want to come in what I like to call riding the escalator, which is to draw and present the gun and go vertical as soon as possible, or I should say horizontal as soon as possible. And as I begin that vertical push and bring the gun higher, higher, and higher, and higher, I want to keep that muzzle as horizontal as possible. And if I do everything correctly, I'm going to connect my eye-hand coordination to my proprioception, get the presentation of the gun, and I'm going to get that optic to eye alignment. Of course, the way I'm going to practice this, like I mentioned, is dry fire, dry fire, dry fire, dry fire. And you don't even have to do trigger presses, you just have to practice draw strokes, which is very helpful in developing that skill set, and it only requires you to invest a little bit of time, not so much money spent as far as rounds fired. So I want to get that skill set established, at least consciously competent, before I even take the system to the range if I can help it. If you already have a red dot and you're kind of struggling with it, this is something you can do prior to your next range trip to greatly benefit you. Now, how do we make sure that the optic aligns to the eye? It can't be as simple as just pressing the gun out to where I'm looking, can it? Yes and no. It is that simple. However, a final degree of alignment needs to take place. And I like to rely on just, again, coming back to proprioception, my body's ability to know where my hands are at any given time, those two hands joined together. What I want to make sure is that that back plate or rear hammer or whatever the rear of your gun looks like is roughly aligned to my nose, and it's probably, and I say probably because I have seen a few shooters, this is an extreme minority, where this had to be a final degree of alignment, or I should say refinement had to take place. But because my body knows where my nose is and it knows where my hands is, that final alignment is going to take place more intuitively than trying to come up with some other technique. And the backplate to nose technique is something I like because it doesn't require you to be in a specific stance or position. It works one-handed, it works two-handed, it works support hand only, primary hand only. It works on your back, it works on the rein, it works in a train. It works seated, it works crawling, it works in any physical position you can think of because of that spatial awareness, that proprioception of my body's ability to know where my hands are in relation to my face. So as I present that gun, and this is something you can say it out loud, but you might seem a little bit crazy, but I'm definitely going to say it to myself, is backplate to nose, backplate to nose, backplate to nose. Now, I have to underscore, I'm not talking about physically bringing the gun up to your nose and then driving it out. What we're looking for in that development is pressing the gun out and saying backplate to nose, backplate to nose, backplate to nose, which is going to put that optic at the eye height because it sits above the backplate, and it should naturally drift towards that dominant eye. What you may find is your dominant eye isn't as dominant as you thought it was. Although eye dominance with the red dot is not nearly as large of a factor as we see on iron sights or we see on rifles with red dots. The gun's just going to float in front of our face. I'm going to stay target focused. The final thing I want to talk about with grip is how and when the support hand mates to the primary hand. This isn't something that's necessarily red dot dependent, but it is something I noticed in myself a little bit and other shooters because the red dot shows me those small mistakes that iron sights just can't. And that is when the support hand mates to the primary hand. It's not a huge issue for some shooters depending on hand size related to the gun size. But what I've seen is people tend to draw and then the support hand chases the primary hand out. When it finally meets on the gun, you end up with the digital tips of your primary hand pressing into the palm of your support side hand, which creates unequal pressure on the gun. Just like all things, we love homeostasis, we like symmetry. So if I have unequal pressure on the gun without any conscious input from me, I may start milking that grip to fix that pressure imbalance without even consciously realizing. So when my support hand mates to the gun on the draw stroke, two-handed shooting, as I draw out, I'm not going to chase it out there. I'm going to ambush it. My support hand is going to be primed to catch the gun as it goes by, and it's going to come in from the side versus in from the rear. Now you take these skills together and you stack them into your dry fire practice, and you deliberately practice and consciously focus on grip pressure and consciously focus on making that balance. And of course, we're going to address grip pressure throughout this series. I think you'll find that not only do you get the dot more efficiently, you're going to have a shorter road or less steep of a hill to climb, whatever analogy you want to use, to reach the summit of I'm getting the dot consistently every single time when I press it out, and I didn't have to fire a single round to get there. So my basic practice advice from you is work from whatever holster system you're going to work for. The final thing that we have to address with this is the dot's behavior during the draw stroke. As a left-handed shooter drawing from concealment, I'm carrying from appendix. If I'm carrying from appendix, I have to address the fact that the gun has to come out and it has to rotate. As it rotates, that dot is coming from right to left and bottom to top as I come into my eye to optic alignment. Not a huge issue, however, you may see as the dot comes up and finally settles, you may see that travel. So if you're a right-handed shooter, it's probably coming from left to right. If I'm drawing from a duty holster, hip carry, and I'm coming up, again, bottom to top, but I have a little bit of left to right travel. If you're right-handed, you're going to have the opposite, just based on which side of the body the gun is coming from or which way it's rotating based if you're drawing from centerline appendix carry. This is no different from carrying inside the waistband on the hip. Duty carry or coming back to appendix is we want to visualize that process and get kind of a recording of what our dot's behavior looks like during our draw stroke. What you'll find is the more refined your techniques become, the more efficient your settling and stop point is. When I first started shooting a red dot handgun, especially carrying from concealment, I would get that bottom to top and I'd get that right to left travel. If you're right-handed, it's going to be left to right. Bottom to top stays the same. And what I'd find is I would over travel. So I would be drawn out and that dot would become right to left, right to left, right to left, and it would kind of pass by my desired point of impact, sometimes only a little, and I'd have to make a final adjustment to bring it back. By practicing and knowing what that dot looks like and getting a visual recording of it, I get to see what a good travel looks like. The cool thing about the red dot is your sight picture moves at the speed of light. Photons are a wonderful thing. So we get this visual recording of the process, and it's not as vague as iron sight travel during the draw stroke, because those tend to be a little bit blurry and the final picture is just based on us making small corrections. So hopefully this video is going to be helpful for you without any rounds fired in developing this skill set and being able to build the foundation, which is that draw stroke.